the mariners who are carrying Jonah across the water, which they're heading towards Spain, the opposite direction, they begin to cry out, but they're crying out to their gods. They're pagans. And they're trying to figure out, what do we have to do? It's a storm that's not an average storm. Even the pagans knew that God's hand was in the storm. And they recognized it. And they're thinking, what must we do? And they're crying out. They want Jonah to cry out. They begin to empty their load and cargo to try to save themselves. They're in full crisis mode as a result of what's taking place. And the mariners are trying to figure out, how are we going to save our life? How can we have salvation? And what they come to realize is that one person missing on the ship that's not doing anything, and that's Jonah. And where is Jonah? He's asleep down in the lower deck. That's where he is. But when we look at that, maybe we have people like that around us. They've rejected God. They're not living in God's will. They're not walking out the call he has on their life. And they bring utter chaos into our lives. But they're leaving us with the consequences while they're fast asleep. That's a reality. I've made a decision that your chaos is not welcomed into my life. That's a decision I've made. Why? Because I've been caught in chaos. And you know how I know? Because I was the one causing it. I was the one who was fast asleep in the lower deck, bringing chaos to everyone around me. I was rejecting God. I was rejecting God's call. And it was kind of, for my own life, the more I rejected it, the greater the storm. And I'm so grateful for the storm. See, our disobedience will always have a consequence. But our consequences can lead us back to God. See, my disobedience in my own life towards God had consequences, right? There's consequences. But it was in those consequences of dealing with my rebellion that led me back to God. So Jonah tried to run from God, and now he'll have 3 days in the belly of a whale to think about it. But now you're in this place where you have to deal with you. And what am I going to do with me? And that's what Jonah was doing. 3 days in that whale. And how lonely, dark, and desperate does this have to get in our life till we finally admit we're wrong? That we've turned in the wrong direction with God. Well, this is that moment for Jonah in the whale. And when we read in Jonah chapter 2, really it's Jonah's prayer, chapter 2. It's a psalm before God. And it's Jonah admitting, God, I'm wrong. I missed it. And Jonah's prayer is a prayer of reconciliation, it's a prayer of renewal, and it's a prayer of revival. It's our response to the Lord that leads to that salvation. It's what we do with what we heard. So how do we respond? How do we respond? Well, here's ultimately what I think. I think we need to learn to pray like Jonah. We need that prayer. Not just once, but a continuing of that prayer in our own life. Because there's a calling for each of us. And what we believe in our heart needs to be declared with our mouth. And that's where we're brought into that right relationship. That's where reconciliation happens. That's where renewing happens. And ultimately, that's where revival happens. Revival that's not just for us, a revival that works through us, just as Jonah was called to bring. Amen?